Okay, so we're going to build. Thank you so much to Robert. I'm not sure if he's still in the room. That data was incredible. We greatly appreciate the walkthrough. And we're going to dive a little bit more into that conversation with these fantastic experts we have up here today. So this session is called Writing Ohio's Next Political Chapter. We're going to talk about what the future holds. We're going to do a little crystal ball gazing. And I'm really, really excited about the folks that we have here this morning with us. We've got Mike Hartley. Mike is president of Swing State Strategies, where he draws on over 20 years of experience in politics, policy, and public affairs. Mike has served as the vice president of government relations at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce for many years and was a leading political operative in Ohio for over a decade. And he lives in Circleville with his wife and two beautiful children. Over here, we have Christy Angel. Christy brings over 30 years of experience spanning public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Christy is managing partner at Broadview Talent Partners, and she specializes in executive leadership, onboarding, and organizational alignment. Christy was formerly the CEO of the YWCA of Columbus and led a major brand transformation. And she's held lots of really incredible roles, including Deputy Chief of Staff for Columbus Mayor Michael B. Coleman. And finally, we have our friend Aaron Pickerel down here on the end. Aaron is managing partner at Remington Road Group, which he helped found in 2011. And they are a Columbus-based public affairs firm. Aaron has over 2 decades in politics or government. He's worked with governors. He worked with Governor Strickland, managed his gubernatorial campaigns, and he held senior roles in the Obama and Biden campaigns as well. And he's also been named one of Politico's 50 Politicos to watch. So Aaron lives in Bexley with his wife and 2 daughters. So thank you all for being here. Let's give it up for them for spending their morning with us. And the first question I have is really for all of you to chime in, and we can keep this like conversational and build off one another. But a little bit of context building off of Robert's presentation. So the 2026 election might feel far away to some of us in our day-to-day lives, but we know for experts like you who've worked through campaign cycles, the planning is already deeply underway, right? Ohioans will be voting, just to recap, not to only replace our term-limited governor, Governor DeWine, after 8 years of service, but we'll also be voting on some other statewide offices, treasurer, auditor, and lots of legislative races and local races. So in addition to all of that fun at the federal level, we've got a really perhaps one of the most hotly contested U.S. Senate races between current Senator Husted, Governor DeWine's former lieutenant governor, and now Democrat Sherrod Brown returning to the fray. So all that backdrop, all this high-profile political activity, what do you all think are some of the top issues that are going to be on Ohio voters' minds as they're considering these races? Mike, I can start with you.
Brittany, thank you very much. Obviously, Aaron needs to update his picture.
I look young.
Nice. Keep trying. So first of all, thank you for the invite.
Of course.
Christy and Aaron are two of my most favorite people that I've worked with over the years. Aaron and I have gone head-to-head a few different times, and Christy's kept me out of trouble back when I was at the chamber and trying to start land wars with the city of Columbus. So thank you, Christy. So to answer your question, I think it starts with what you saw from Robert, right? We've been doing this long enough. It always starts with jobs and economy and the kitchen table pocketbook issues. It starts from there. Now, within that are a bunch of other, kind of subsets, right? So the affordability thing is huge, right? Jobs and the economy, wages, right? And you've probably heard the term property taxes. I have not seen an issue like this come about where understand what you're seeing is people are pissed, all right, about a bunch of stuff, but they're really pissed about property taxes. And therefore, what you see, that's why you've seen the legislature try to get things to address property taxes. Just passed two bills in the House yesterday. David Thomas, state representative, Great American, he's really taken this on. I think that is going to cover kind of everything next year if that thing gets on the ballot, because if it passes, there's a $24 billion budget hole that there's no way to fill. So, yay.
And how does 24 billion compare to like the general state budget? I mean, that's a significant, you don't have to go to
I
exact
think
percentage, but
again, the way they do the numbers is kind of different, but it's a lot. Yeah. I don't know how else to say it. And I mean, it's just a gigantic thing. Remember, no offense, Aaron, but when Kasich's first campaign against Strickland, we talked about an $8 billion budget hole, right? That was pretty significant. A lot of things happened to fill that hole. Times that by 3. So I think you're going to see, the traditional issues, but then which have a lot of subsets to it. But this property tax thing is of concern for everybody.
Thank you. Christy, Aaron, what do you guys think about property tax and other issues?
Well, is this on? Okay. I agree with you, Mike, on the property tax issue. Sometimes my litmus test is Ken and Jane Angel sitting in their kitchen table, who both are in their 80s, talking about what they're going to vote for. My dad, in particular, not voting for anything that raises my property taxes. I'm trying to stay in my home, and this year and I'm going to have to stop using them as my litmus test because there is a bit of curmudgeon and cantankerousness that is starting to come into play. But nevertheless, they were like, sorry, Aaron, no zoo, no this, no that. No bond issue. The city of Columbus has a bond issue, does not raise your taxes. And I'm sitting there arguing with them. These are two people who were, by the way, city of Columbus employees for most of their career. So, but it gets back to this. It's affordability. And so affordability is really in there, I feel like it's on the ballot, but it gets on the ballot or it filters into these conversations around property tax because it is the one thing that people can see, right? They look at their tax bill and they see it going up, up, up. You've got Adam H, you've got, we call it Adam H in Franklin County, but you've got alcohol, drug, mental health levies, you've got other property tax, school levies, you've got, things like the zoo or other things. And people are saying, I cannot afford any longer to see, my taxes, my property taxes go up because also I'm paying more for food, I'm paying more for rent. If you're renting, I am paying more for other things. And so then we get to an issue, I think like, childcare, and we're talking about, high quality childcare and why it is important and all of those things. And if something like that were to go on the ballot, I think we're really in trouble, right? Because you have a number of people who really, really, really care about it. And you have a number of people who are like, oh, that's way behind me, right? I'm in my 70s, I'm in my 60s, what have you, what have you. And we'll talk a little bit more about, I think, how to bring people into the issue. But I think, in general, going back to, our presenter, Democrats have lost their way in talking about kitchen table issues, and we've got to get back to that. I say we because, if you haven't figured out, I am, or I'm not sure if I'm a Democrat or an independent anymore, but nevertheless, we've got to get back to those issues in general. And because the Ohioans' affordability, no matter where you live, and I travel the state, doing search work for people all over this state and beyond. But I also know that not everyone is enjoying the success of a Franklin County or maybe a Hamilton County, or some of the larger cities. And we've got to talk about issues that blend together what the pain that people are feeling and how to fix that. And if we end up with a double-digit billion-dollar budget, cities are going to get decimated. I mean, you have to go to local government fund. There are things that have to get cut to fill that hole. There's pain that's going to be felt all around. So, it's you're either going to feel it here or you're going to feel it there.
Thanks, Christy. And I'll just note that pain, we've been really trying to to spread awareness around the $600 million specifically to the childcare system that we know we're going to be facing in the next budget cycle. So you think about $24 billion potentially being removed from those dollars that we're all talking about. That's really specific to our folks. Aaron, is affordability top of mind to voters
Sure.
in your books?
I mean, I think in the last, like 20 years of doing politics in Ohio, I think economic anxiety has been sort of the driving motivator for voters throughout that period of time. I think, in 2016, when President Trump was first elected and won Ohio, he traveled around Ohio talking about, like, I'm going to bring back the coal jobs to Appalachia. Don't move out of Youngstown because I'm going to save the Lordstown auto facility. Like, he was feeding into a lot of the anxiety folks had and saying that he's going to solve all the problems. And I think that, access to quality childcare is certainly one of those economic anxiety factors that come into play. And now I think you throw in inflation, you throw in rising utility costs. I mean, you throw in the potential healthcare massive spike that could be coming down the road. I think that overall economic anxiety will be the number one driving factor for voters again, just like Robert's presentation showed. I do think it's interesting that he brought it up. The democracy component is one that, like, Democrats have focused on small d democracy for a while. Like, we need to expand voting access, we need to do voter registration, things like that. But I think now with the redistricting conversations that are happening in particular, and it's just, obviously I'm a Democrat, but like, it's so blatant on what's being done to game the system right now, where like we're going to open up in Florida or in Texas or whatever, we're going to open up the process to purposefully draw Republican districts in order to maintain the majority. I mean, I think that, we're seeing that here now, where that it's, we're going through this process of the redistricting process, but no one's even really trying to pretend like we're doing it the way that it's in the Constitution. It's just like, well, we'll have a meeting, but then we'll just go and we'll jam it down the road. There was a poll that Bowling Green did that came out earlier this week that talked about like 60% of Ohio voters are dissatisfied with sort of the way our democracy process is going forward. I mean, that's a big deal, and I think that you'll continue to see that. And then just I think the final driving factor in the election next year will be how people feel about President Trump and his policies. And I think that the same poll, and I'll stop talking, like his favorability was +6 in February, -1 in April, -10 this week. So I think that voters' attitude towards the president, and he is the face of the Republican Party, I think that's going to help drive how people feel going into the election next year.
Thank you. Thinking about, we're talking a lot about affordability. We saw in Robert's numbers that by a 2-to-1 margin, despite, some of the partisan climate we're talking about, voters are willing to cross party lines if they think a candidate is going to support issues like access to childcare. How do we kind of rein that in and cut through some of this other noise to make sure that these are priority issues for the candidates that we're seeing on the ballot in Ohio? Anybody who's feeling moved can jump in.
Well, I'll start. First and foremost, Brittany, this is a workforce issue. It's an employer issue. I am, an employer. Employers out there know what it's like to get that call. I mean, when your phone rings at 6:30 or 7 in the morning, you're like, oh, someone's probably not coming to the office because of something. If a child is sick, if daycare is closed, I mean, whatever, right? And if you want your employees to come to work being their very best selves, then they need to know that their children are, in a safe place being cared for. The cost, I was at a conference, when was that, Tasha? Wednesday, yeah. Our speaker said that the average cost of childcare in Ohio is $15,000 a year, give or take probably a few $1,000s. And so when someone has to think about $15,000 a year plus rent, plus car insurance, we're still a car state, right? We don't have mass transportation and those kinds of things. The cost of living is just generally very expensive, and it continues to rise. When you see that just our Thanksgiving meal, the cost of the turkey is gone way up, right? And so I think that we have to, one, talk to policymakers about this being a working person's workforce issue that affects all of us, hands down, whether you have children, don't have children, etc. I also think, and you all can shoot me for saying this because yes, I led the YWCA, but we need more men in the conversation. We need more men in the conversation because it can't just be a mom or a woman's issue. It is all of our issue, And then back to my curmudgeonly, I shouldn't call them that. Don't tell Ken and Jane I said that. So, but back to grandparents, right? I say to my grandparents, my parents who are grandparents of young children all of the time when they're like, oh, Ariana's sick and we have to keep her. But we're in our 80s, and how healthy is that we're keeping the sick child, right? Oh, I had something to do, but I had to cancel it because I have to help take Dion to, keep Dion or what have you. That's my niece and nephew. And I'm like, if your lifestyle, mom and dad, is becoming compromised because childcare is becoming a bit of a challenge, think about what that must be like for people who don't have grandparents that they can rely on, right? I'm like, get in the game. Now, that's probably about the time they turn me off and tell me it's time for me to go. But I say that to say this has to be all of our issue. It can't just be the working mom or the mom's issue to make policymakers care about it. And let me just say one last thing and I'll stop talking. In 1999, when Mike Coleman ran, he ran on an issue, it was really about after school care. And it was our slogan was a parent's worry, greatest worry is between the hours of 3 and 7 when they don't know where their children are after school. And it was because his child, I took the call, his child in middle school was out hanging out with someone and did something that he shouldn't have done. And the police called me. And I got to deliver the message to Michael Coleman that you need to stop doing what you're doing and go deal with this situation. It was personal. It was personal. And he knew, he was like, if I don't know where my kid is riding through Berwick on his bike doing something he shouldn't do, what do other parents worry about? And it became an essential part of our campaign. So we've got to get personal, we've got to get relatable, and we need everybody in the game, and we need it to be a workforce issue.
And I want to build off that workforce comment too. Mike, you spent a lot of your career working at the Columbus Chamber. Does childcare as a workforce issue resonate with employers? How do we thread that needle and make it really clear and relatable to Christy's point?
So yeah, I mean, to employers, 100%, but they don't vote on stuff. So what you have to do is make it relatable to those policymakers. Now, if you haven't noticed over the last 2 to 3 cycles in the legislature, particularly in the House, we've had a generational shift, significant generational shift. So we kicked all the boomers out. And so you have a bunch of young people elected under the age of 40 who have kids, who understand this issue, who are facing it. So I think that this is a opportune time because I hear it. I hear, Representative Nick Santucci, they just had a little baby. Like they're up in it. They like all of Demetrio, all these different folks have young children and they're facing this. And I think that an opportune time is now. I know we'll get to this, but looking ahead, there potentially you're going to have a governor who's in his early 40s that has young kids. Okay, the opportunity I think for all of you in this room and Groundworks and people that care about this issue is to have a real conversation, because as Christy mentioned, boomers are past it. They're kind of like, now you have a bunch of for the most part millennials that are in there that have, and I think you have an opportunity, a unique opportunity right now to have the conversation where you're going to have an ear, and it's across the board. It's both sides of the party. And I think you're gonna get a favorable response. Now, the issue is everything else going in, right? You've heard kind of previously priorities, right? Like all the stuff we're facing, what do we prioritize to spend our money on? Remove the property tax dark cloud that could come and away. I know, disclaimer, it's a very bad idea to govern by ballot initiative. Always has been, always will be. So, boo. But I really think each and every one of you go in and talk like you had, like, there's a target rich environment of young people who have kids, who are school age kids that care about and are dealing with this exact same issue. Issue is prioritizing. So I hope that answered your question.
It absolutely does. Aaron, what do you think? We've got 200 folks in the room ready to go. How do they cut through the noise?
I think that one of the amazing elements that's happened in the last handful of years is the partnership between Groundwork and the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. I think the fact that Rick's here, the fact that the chamber is talking to their membership and highlighting the fact that this is an economic development challenge that we have in the state, and right or wrong, I think over time, in previous years, many policymakers saw childcare as the responsibility of the parents. Just figure it out. If your child care facility isn't working, just call the grandparents, have them take the kid or whatever. Just find a place to put the child for the day while you're at work. That doesn't work anymore. And because of that, and I think during COVID, you saw it a little bit too, where it was the owner of the restaurant was having childcare challenges along with the cook at the restaurant. So it just sort of democratized childcare challenges for everyone too, because if there aren't childcare providers, even if you can afford it, you're not going to have anywhere to take your child. And I think that making sure that policymakers fully understand the overall consequences of this, and that it's not just a personal responsibility for everyone to figure out how to take care of their small child. And if you truly believe in the nurturing and the development of kids, and they're going to be the future workforce and all of that, we really need to make these investments. And I think it's why it's so valuable that Rick and the chamber are really leaning in on this, because policymakers now see it as like, okay, like we have to do something about this if we truly want to ensure that we have the workforce for folks to go to Intel or Anduril or whatever these new jobs are that we're bringing into the state. It has to happen. So I think that that's the key element, is like, it's about the future of the state and how we help it grow and be stronger. And we can't do it without everyone having access to quality, affordable childcare.
100%.
Brittany, I would say one other thing though. It also is, we have to simplify the solutions, right? So it can't be, I don't think we're talking, we know Mike has told us kind of where this property tax issue is going. So, is it a child care tax credit? Is it, thank you, Lynn Ann, for reminding me about that, but child care tax credit, is it, I like what Robert had up here. I took a picture of the slide, tax incentives to the employer who pass it on to, the employee. Those kinds of solutions, some of those could be localized as well. And, the authority maybe comes from the state and gets passed down, but some creative solutions. That's why I am really excited to see Rick here, because I think your Chamber of Commerce can come up with some solutions that get debated and discussed between their members, and then perhaps, floated up to the General Assembly. But then also, is it a way to invite local government to also be a part of the solution and pass some of those creative policy solutions on to work to the employers and to the families?
And I can't echo enough Rick's partnership. The U.S. Chamber Foundation, thanks to Rick and the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, was able to put together a report called the Untapped Potential Report, which if you haven't seen it yet, I think talking about being relatable and memorable and cutting through the noise, that $5.5 billion that the state of Ohio is leaving on the table every single year because of the childcare crisis, that resonates with employers, that resonates with voters, and hopefully it resonates with policymakers too. So we really appreciate that partnership. Aaron, I want to go back. You talked a little bit about the effect of the president's approval rating on turnout and on how things happen on election day. And you've seen a lot of different compilations of different candidates on the ballot over the years in different election cycles. How does this kind of constellation that we're looking at for 2026 impact voter turnout? Does the potential property tax ballot initiative impact turnout? How does this all fit together?
You know, it always shows your age when you harken back to the good old days. But part of it is I was thinking back to 2006. One reason it was a great year for me because I ran Ted Strickland's campaign and we won. So, you know, I like to remember the things that went well in your life. But when you think back, you'd have, prior to 2006, you had a Republican president that wasn't very popular. The Iraq War was inflaming activists in a really big way, and you had a lot of protests across the country. This past weekend, we had a lot of protests across the country. There were 1,000 people in Bexley. I was driving down Broad Street, and they're like, it was just crazy. I mean, you'd hear these numbers of like the number of people you talk to anecdotally, like, I've never been to one of these things before. This is like, so I think that there's this energy that's on the left, or not even on the left necessarily, this energy for change that's kind of percolating around. Prior to 2006, you had 2 full terms of Republican governors. You had complete Republican control of state government. You had scandal in government that kind of percolated along. You had Sherrod Brown running against an incumbent United States senator. You had the can't remember what I was saying, basically limiting tax collection that would have sort of frozen state spending in a really significant way. You had a Republican gubernatorial candidate that was viewed as a national conservative figure, and you had this Appalachian congressman. So I think that there's just all these things that are percolating around that, like an energy for change, concern about the current state of affairs, that I think could sort of change what people currently think the trajectory of Ohio is. I mean, that, not to keep going back to it, but the Bowling Green poll that came out earlier this week, I mean, Sherrod Brown's up by 1 point over John Husted in that poll. I mean, I think that that's a really significant data point for people who think that Ohio is just a red state that no one could ever possibly win. So, you know, who knows how it's all going to shake out? We have a year to go, but I think that there's a lot of change on the horizon. There's all this economic anxiety that exists out there and a lot of concern that folks have. And you have Republican supermajorities in the House and the Senate, and you've had a Republican governor for the last 16 years. So it's like, and a Republican Supreme Court. I mean, and Republican statewide elected officials, and Republican president, and Republican U.S. senators. Like, it's hard to place blame anywhere else if you want change to come about. So I'm kind of a glass half full sort of guy on this stuff, and I've been proven wrong year after year after year. But I think it's really interesting the state of the world right now, and there's just a lot of churn, and it's like we're in sort of unprecedented times from a political perspective too, where the polarization that Robert spoke about and all these other elements that come into play. So you can't really, like, I operate from the rules that Mike and I used to play with back in the day, and like they don't really apply anymore. But I do think that like there's an openness to potentially see some changes in the electoral horizon in Ohio.
Mike, I would love to hear your response to that. And I would also like to remind the room, Groundwork Ohio is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization. We have invited friends that have different affiliations, but we are right there at that nonpartisan space. So I'd love to hear your response. And also, we had the opportunity to work closely with you on the Medicaid Matters campaign this year during the state budget cycle. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the Medicaid kind of crisis and voters' understanding of it impacts their turnout. So a little bit of a two-parter.
Okay. In response to Aaron, so whenever I'm asked kind of what do I see happening in an election that's a year away, ask me in June of next year. That's when kind of everything starts getting locked in. June, July, the summer, you start having, okay, the political environment. Because despite what Aaron and I may tell you, the determinative of elections is often things you can't control. The political environment. You could be the greatest operative in the world, run the best campaign, and still lose. So Now I do have to say something about Aaron referencing this BGSU poll. Because I just had to do this for a client CEO yesterday because they freaked the hell out. One, college political polls are usually garbage. I'm a Baldwin Wallace graduate. They do this every time, and I have to answer this. So they're historically wrong. Maybe not garbage. They're wrong. So, give you an example, BGSU poll. The last poll they did, they were off by, on the presidential election, by about 4.5 points. Not bad. On the Senate race, they had Brown winning by 4 points. They're off 8 points on that. And then on issue 1, which was the redistricting, whatever, they're off by $1 billion. They had it winning 60-20. So, I'll just preface that. Sorry, it's just a thing. Over the years, I think a lot of public polls are.
Polls are great when they
Crap.
inform what your theory should be, and they're bad when they don't. Like
Right.
I'm guilty just like Mike.
Right. What Robert did, effective and helpful. What BGSU and Baldwin Wallace and whatever, used to be the University of Cincinnati. Yeah. All right. Sorry. Now, Medicaid, right? So, how does it impact the ballot? And I think you kind of had something here, Ohioans voting against their financial interest, which is historically throughout our history, voters vote against their financial interests without knowing it, to be honest. Healthcare in general should be an issue, right? Medicaid in particular should be an issue. But again, you get to the point where you're going to hear me talk about this. We have got to prioritize what is important to us in the state and nationally. I think what you're seeing, so how are voters feeling? And when you have what occurred earlier, where in the federal government you saw USAID, these NGOs, people are like, what the, that's billions upon billions of dollars that's going to things that nobody gives a crap about. And, then there's we have got to, the money's there. That's the thing. That's the thing. The money's there, but you can't spend money on everything, right? And we've got to prioritize what is important to us. You're going to have, I think Medicaid and what we're looking at in 2026 is going to be, it's going to be an issue. But you saw in Robert's polling, it's not again, affordability, economy, jobs. Those are the kitchen table stuff is really what's going to start it. Now, subset of that is healthcare and all that other stuff. So, is Medicaid specifically going to be a major issue? It will be an issue. But you're going to, the things that are going to win elections are those things that are the top priorities of the voters, which you saw.
So it's more of a subset. It's an economic issue, but the economy more broadly is what's driving folks.
Yes.
Chrissy, I want to turn it over to you because you have this unique vantage point of having served in such a high impact public role, right, under Mayor Coleman, but then also leading an organization focused specifically on moms and young children and some of the most crisis moments of their life sometimes. How do you think, we've talked about how we get these messages out to voters, right? Affordability is important. How do we center this in those policymakers' ideas? Since you've kind of been on both sides of the table, how do we come to our political leaders, whether they're a candidate or they're already in office, and center that experience of children and moms?
Well, Brittany, it goes back to something, Mike just said, and I did not realize, I should have thought about this, but the General Assembly members and how young they are. Again, it goes back to being those personal issues. People, look, I had to be a fundraiser, right? YWCA to raise money, every day. And relationships, relational, being relatable and understanding where people are matters and so for me, I go back to, I used to do government relations work and I used to talk to Shannon Jones all the time, right? And we may not, it wasn't about me personally and what I agreed personally or what I, thought about personally, but it was about the whatever the issue was of the day and the client I was representing. But also we developed a personal relationship. We broke bread a few times. We were actually neighbors at one point. And we've got to get back to that and stop making everything about these quick sound bites and TikTok and Instagram and all of this kind of stuff. And can we just get to know people and understand a little bit more about them? And, oh, you're having this issue, I'm having this issue. Well, have you thought about solving it this way or that way? I mean, is it harder? Sure, because, you've got to get people's attention, but you've got to walk in and out of offices and get to know people and go back to those issues that are relatable and even personal to them. And, I said it earlier, we've got to get kind of everybody in the game, I think. Now that's about building the coalition and so forth. But again, for the policymakers, they're going to have a lot of issues in front of them. And so this has to kind of bubble up and be a part of, I think, that greater affordability and economic stability conversation.
Thank you. And building off of that, you gave such a great personal example of that bipartisan relationship building. Aaron, I want to return to the child tax credit as a potential bipartisan opportunity. Do you think there is opportunity for movement there? Are there other policy issues and opportunities for trying to create some of that bipartisan product that Christy's referencing?
Yeah, you sure hope so. It still is mind-boggling to me that the legislature didn't pass the child tax credit in the budget process. It's, you had the bold leadership of Governor DeWine putting an issue forward. It was paid for. It's the same issue that Vice President Vance had been, advocating for before he became vice president. You have super liberal guys like Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri who was advocating for it. You had Senator Brown advocating for the child tax credit at the federal level. And the fact that it wasn't able to sort of seep in, you really hope that folks recognize that there's a lot of economic anxiety going on out there and a lot of families that are making really hard choices. What can we do to help them? CTC just seems like such a no-brainer to me. So hopefully, I think to Mike's point, that now we have younger legislators and younger leaders that are coming into play. And it is you live in a school district and there's a school levy. You may not vote for the school levy if your kids are in college. I mean, I think hopefully people are going to start some of our policymakers will utilize their personal experience to figure out how they can help all of Ohio. But it's such a nonpartisan issue, bipartisan issue that could have such a profound impact. You really hope that over time we can seep it in, because it was such a sort of bold initiative that the governor put into the budget process and drove it there till the end, and then it just didn't make it. And then there were tax cuts put in place that I would argue don't necessarily impact all Ohioans in ways that are really meaningful and can help ensure that they can buy groceries. But a bit of a partisan statement, but so I'm hopeful that it is. I mean, I do think that it's having the voices like the chamber, it's having the voices from all of the leaders in this room going out and talking about why this would have such a tangible impact on everyday voters. And I think people running for office recognizing what a ripe issue this is for them to travel around the state and talk about something that is going to resonate in any room, regardless of the partisan makeup of the room. I think that it's could be a really hopefully valuable issue to focus on, along with affordability and paid leave and a lot of other issues that come into play I think it's cool the way that a lot of Republican policymakers now are starting to talk about sort of the support for the whole family. How do we people advocating for paid family leave, ensuring access to quality childcare, not just childcare, quality, affordable childcare, making sure that kids have the tools they need to be ready for kindergarten. I think that not that it's new, but it, like there seems to me, it feels like there's a new focus on that policy, and hopefully that'll really catch on.
We sure hope so. And honestly, when you're listing off all of those supporters of the child tax credit across both sides of the aisle, state and national level, it's wild that it wasn't a slam dunk here in Ohio. So hopefully there's still some juice there. Christy, I want to return to, you beautifully described some instances of creating more bipartisan relationships, but we still know there's just kind of this backdrop of everybody talks about the gridlock in DC and the national polarization. How does that rhetoric impact what we're seeing in races here in Ohio? Can we transcend that?
So I was thinking about this because, in some ways, it's like, that's DC, that's not Ohio. People feel that way, and they're like, and I love my congressperson, or we see our congresspeople working together, or we see our local officials working with state officials. And so sometimes it's like, it feels like we're removed from it. But I do think that the rhetoric, obviously it's at an all-time high. I've never seen anything like this before. And I worry that it creates voter apathy. So, for instance, here's kind of my barometer right now. There's a local election. I know that this is an off-year election in 2025, but there are issues on the ballot. And I was looking at my direct mail pieces yesterday, and there's a little bit of rancor kind of going on with some of these local elections, and some things. And I know people have to go negative and do all the things that they do, but I'm like, oh, it feels a little different. It feels different. And these are two people of the same party running in Franklin County, and so or the city of Columbus actually. And so I'm like, is it starting to seep in? I don't know. But I'm also like, I know that there are people, my neighbors were just kind of like throwing their hands up like, oh, I don't want to be bothered with it, right? And it's like, but you still have to vote. So I hope that what is happening in DC doesn't permeate kind of how Ohio has performed heretofore, but I also hope that we don't have a lot of voter apathy. So I'm looking at this latest election and just trying the one that will happen in 2 weeks. Turnout, like, what's turnout going to be? Now, it's going to be lower than it would be, in a general, a larger election, a presidential and such. But we've got to get people back to caring and voting, and because that's the way that you bring about change. And so I don't have a good answer for you other than it's a wait and see, I think. And Ohio has always felt different to me, but I'm not sure anymore.
I think I got that same mailer, and as a City of Columbus voter, and I think that this, it is interesting to see sometimes the attacks coming from within one's own party these days, and not just in primary season. So building off of that, Mike, I'd love to hear how are you seeing, what are your predictions for some of the leadership in the General Assembly? It's not just, it is a supermajority in both chambers, but it's not just a foregone conclusion who's going to lead things anymore despite that. So what do you see as being kind of up ahead as we look at changing legislative leadership with term limits and folks moving seats over there?
Well, obviously you have a Speaker Huffman who's going to be there, and for another 3 terms, most likely. So the Senate, I'm gonna love this one. No,
That's an easy question.
well, I actually can't answer it. So the RSCC is a client, so I can't answer who will be the next Senate president.
Would you like to maybe take an executive crack? Want to try to guess the governor?
Oh, as of right now, it's going to be Vivek Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
So pretty handily.
Christine, Aaron, what do you think for governor's race?
Ditto. I mean, right now, that Vivek Ramaswamy seems to be the foregone conclusion, the stronger candidate. Democrats get your act together. I don't know, between messaging and, strength of, kind of, who's at the top of the ticket all the way down. And, I know that you've got Sherrod, but does that really translate to being, the top of the ticket? And, it just feels like Democrats are headed to another, I'm not going to say Rob Berchier because you guys aren't going to remember who that was.
I do.
But nevertheless, that's the way it feels right now.
What about you, Aaron?
I'm optimistic. No, I think Amy Acton is running for the Democratic nomination right now. Tim Ryan is talking about potentially getting in the race. I think the Democratic nominee is still a little bit fluid on how that could potentially shake out. I think that when you look at Robert's poll and you see all of the economic anxiety that exists in this state and all of the concern that people have, the potential hope for change. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy would certainly be a different governor than Mike DeWine. But you've got Republican if you want to change things, don't do the same thing you've been doing for the last 16 years. So I think that, maybe it will be, maybe it won't. I think the one thing for me is like Democrats haven't done national Democratic infrastructure type folks have written off the state of Ohio for a while. Since 2016, 2020, like Ohio doesn't matter, the new battleground states or Georgia or Arizona or Michigan or wherever, which means that there's not a lot of infrastructure spending that comes into the state to do voter registration, to do direct voter contact, to go knock on doors, to just sort of help put some of the nuts and bolts elements that are necessary in order to communicate with voters and to turn them out. The Ohio Republican Party has had significant infrastructure. President Trump made Ohio a real priority for a long period of time. The Vice President of the United States is from Ohio. I mean, there's a lot of infrastructure here that's really good. Sherrod Brown running guarantees a certain level of infrastructure investment in this, certain level, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars potentially. And there's no, Robert showed up there, there's no way for the Democrats ever to win a majority in the United States Senate if they do not win states like Ohio. We're not going to pick states like Montana back up, or South Dakota or North Dakota, places that back not that long ago we had Democratic senators, but Ohio is a potential state that you could. And I think that Senator Brown's been in this position before, and I think it could make it really interesting. And I think because of that, it could make the governor's race really interesting as well.
Right. Can I real quick?
Absolutely.
So on the Senate, while I can't comment on the next one, I'll just put a name out there for all of you advocates, Senator Susan Manchester. Future, just file that away. If you happen to meet with her, you should. She's a rising star and somebody you should look at. Nothing to do with 26, but so Aaron mentioned, I just want real quick, he actually mentioned this, and it's something I used with Sherrod Brown particularly. So back in the olden days, Tom Daschle, right? He was Senate Majority Leader, South Dakota. Why the hell does he keep getting reelected? It's because how he was in South Dakota was not the same thing as he was in D.C. So why did Sherrod Brown lose to a guy named Bernie Moreno last year? Is I think you finally had Ohio voters realize the Sherrod Brown that was put forward in the state of Ohio was not the Sherrod Brown that was in D.C. and supported certain things that a vast majority of Ohioans, via me, do not support. And that's why I think moving forward, this is going to be interesting. Listen, Houston's got his handful. It's Sherrod Brown. But I think those two things are very similar in what you're seeing in the state of Ohio.
Brittany,
Yeah,
I will
absolutely.
say another thing that I do. So two things. One, I do think we're seeing the wave of, okay, boomers, get out of the way. And the Xers, I'm not sure, not sure where we, you know,
We're amazing. That's what.
I'm the first year of the Xer. Somebody told me I was a boomer, and I was like, I reject that. But but nevertheless, millennials, right? I mean, and they were like, hey, they want. They're like, you've been holding the spot and holding the seat, and get out of the way and let us lead, and so forth. And we're starting to see, we're feeling that. So that's going to come into play. The other thing that is going to come into play that really hasn't hit us yet, that I see more intensely right now because I'm in the talent business, we're going to hit some bubbles and bumps around unemployment. We were in a employee market for the last 2 to 3 years, and probably before that, but 3 years ago, that's when I got into this business. And, employees were able to, really come to the negotiating table to negotiate offers and get sign-on bonuses and get all kinds of things that I would think my client's never going to go for that, and they did. It's starting to turn. I'm getting more calls where people are looking for work. I'm starting to see the shift of it becoming an employer market. Employers are starting to hold the line on salary negotiations and everything else, and employees are saying, I'll take it because I need a job. Now, we're, executive search, so we're usually in the C-suites, but I'm also asking employers. I used to have employers saying, let's go down a level and help me find the next level of talent. They don't need that anymore. So, or less, they need it less. And I think that that's something, when Mike talked about something that could happen that's out of our control, is what does unemployment look like, which then makes the kitchen table issues even more intense and important. When someone's staring down the face of not having a regular paycheck, what does that look like in this gubernatorial race in 2026?
AI is terrifying.
AI is terrifying. That's right.
I know we've got 2 or 3 minutes left, so I want to make sure audience has a chance. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand in the air, and our team's got mics that they'll gladly walk over. Yeah, I see somebody right here. Vanessa's got a mic right next to you.
Hi. Thank you for your thoughts. I'm interested to understand better what the opposition's messages are that are effective against child tax credit or any investments in early childhood.
So opposition to those investments, not a
like
specific
more specific.
party,
I know it's going to be cost, but what's really, who's opposed, and what are they saying that's effective?
Anything other than costs motivating the folks opposed to some of these investments?
And hopefully this is changing. I mean, I think that there's a mindset at times that hopefully is evolving, where funding that supports children is seen as more of a social safety net funding, as opposed to a necessary investment in the future. And I think a lot of policymakers have had that mindset for a long time. And I think that's, like, to Mike's point earlier about the sort of generational changes that are happening. But I think that you used to be like, well, just your mom, your grandparents need to take care of the kid. That's the way it's supposed to work. And that mindset doesn't operate anymore. And I'm hopeful that I don't know that for a fact that that's the opposite, but just like anecdotally, you seem to pick that up a lot out there in the ether.
I agree with you. I don't know how you can be against it, to be honest. And I'm, I mean, you've seen me up here. It's always made sense. The child tax credit should be increased, at least at the rate of inflation. I'm a big proponent of paid family leave. It's how you pay for it, right? But I've worked on projects around that. Like, it makes, that stuff is important. If Republicans are going to talk about how we need to have more babies, which I am 1,000% in agreement on, then there's another thing to that. Once you have them, you got to support them. You got to invest in them. You got to do the things that make it easier. Those first 8 weeks with a baby and their mother, particularly parents, those are vitally important times. The child tax credit, incredibly important. Like, I don't get why why it's not already a thing. So I agree with you 100%. And I truly believe the time's coming.
Well, I could talk to the three of you all day. I appreciate your expertise so much. Unfortunately, I saw our time is hitting its close. So I just want to thank each of you for spending your morning with us. You're
Thank
welcome
you.
to stick around for the day, and thanks for all your work.